Welcome back to the Group Practice Accelerator podcast, brought to you by Polaris Healthcare Partners, where we leverage decades of healthcare and business experience to drive growth in successful group practices just like yours. If you're a healthcare entrepreneur and you're interested in building, scaling, or exiting your group practice, you've found not only the industry's leading resource for business education, but a team of trusted advisors dedicated to helping you achieve and exceed your goals. In short, the team at Polaris creates clarity, confidence, and results. I'm your host, Jamie Falash, and the Group Practice Accelerator podcast is on the air. Well, with all those long days of January finally in the rear view, the year is marching right on. And I don't know about you, but so far, 2025 has been pretty darn good. We've been really busy here at Polaris with the launch of our hands-on clinical coaching program and recent shows we attended like Yankee, Inner Circle, and AADGP. Not to mention all the new clients that we're serving, and we're really grateful for the trust you place in our expertise. So thank you. And speaking of sharing expertise, today I have my teammate and Transaction Advisory Executive, Kyle Webster, here behind the mic. And Kyle's going to give us not only our monthly market update, but he's going to help you capitalize on the M&A wave. Positioning is everything, so it's time to get prepared to take advantage of the improving market. Kyle, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Jamie. Thanks for having me.
Oh, pleasure to have you. So do you want to kick us off with your market update? It's been a little while here.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've had a chance to connect with a lot of buyers since our last episode together, and the consensus is pretty clear. Buyers are eager to see more deals this year and are actively pursuing opportunities in their markets. In conversation with my buyers over the past month, everyone is really making a strong push, especially in the Midwest and along the East Coast. We're seeing groups being particularly active, either looking to expand into new markets or build some density in their existing footprint. All of the buyers are expecting to bring on more practices than last year, with some even trying to make up for maybe a slower 24. All of this is really going to translate into the buyers being much more proactive in the space and actively seeking out their targets, maybe a little bit more independently.
Oh, got it. Well, that's certainly more good news and exactly what we want to hear as we see some of that validation of what the market's predicted for the start of 2025. So getting right into today's topic of capitalizing on the M&A wave that we see here in the works, we should start with explaining to our listeners what it means for buyers to be more proactive, as you mentioned. So let's elaborate on what you're seeing there, if you could, please.
Yeah, I think for most of our listeners, for most doctors, what that's going to look like is essentially the DSOs being more active in their circles. So you're going to see an uptick in marketing materials from groups in your area, maybe cold calls, and especially offers for valuations and even presentations.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I'm sure that activity has already picked up and they can expect to see those things in a number of fashions. And I know that we've identified some of the markers or actions coming from the buyer, but how will that present to sellers? Or maybe said differently, what will the sellers see from buyers this year as they enter the market?
That increase in activity really translates for our sellers as an increase in opportunity. We've talked about it as an M&A wave or maybe a little bit of a turning of the tide. So I think for owners that are contemplating a sale and wondering when the right time to do it would be, now is really an opportune moment.
Great. And that's wonderful to hear for sellers. And we all love that the market's picked up, but gosh, sellers really just still have to be savvy, don't they? And we can't be running into this head first, unprepared. What do you have to say about that preparation?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. An active set of buyers is a great thing for sellers, but they really need to be properly positioned for it. Going to market isn't something that we want to do kind of on a whim. A real active set of buyers does create a little bit of a risk for sellers to get kind of caught up in the action and leave money on the table.
I'm sure. Gosh, sellers really need to be cautious about getting caught up in that excitement, which is totally understandable. So maybe we should take a minute to talk about what could happen, or maybe what does happen, unfortunately, to people that aren't quite prepared, or maybe a reactive seller. What do they need to be cautious of?
The biggest thing to be wary of is what we call the buy side valuation. A buyer reaching out saying something along the lines of, send us your financial information and we'll come back to you with your EBITDA and an offer.
Ooh, a lot of red flags,
Our general rule of thumb is that a buy-side financial review, especially one that's standalone, is really never in our client's best interest. A buyer is going to provide a broad set of rules of thumb to the modeling with fairly little regard for the individual circumstances in a business.
Ah,
Um,
okay.
there's almost always noise within a practice's financials that has to be stripped away. A buyer really more often than not isn't going to be able to fully capture what needs to be removed.
Yeah, right. And so I want to 2 points really. I want to pause and clarify for our audience before we go forward. First, can you tell our listeners what that noise you're referring to looks like? And second, how you manage that with our sell side clients?
Yeah, absolutely. So noise is just an umbrella term for anything that is abnormal within the business. Our doctors might be familiar with the term add back. So anything that we're going to need to adjust out or normalize to really reflect the business's true financial position. At Polaris, getting that right on the front end and really fully understanding the scope of our ad backs is something that we spend a lot of time with our clients. So that's going to be multiple calls, kind of combing through all of that noise to really distill down what is an ad back or what is going to be an ongoing expense within the business. And that's really the key. That's what needs to happen to be able to get down to that true financial performance.
Yeah, for sure. And I know that you spend a lot of time with our clients on that financial modeling and really setting a solid foundation before they make these decisions, move forward. And, understanding we always have to provide financials so a buyer can put together an appropriate offer. Can you share what some best practices would be for maybe positioning ourselves during that valuation process?
You're absolutely right. We do need to be transparent. We do need to make those materials available so a buyer can do the proper due diligence. We're absolutely not suggesting that we hold anything back. I think what I'd like to get at a little bit more is that when we make that initial presentation, we need to be defining our financial position to the market rather than having the market define it for us. We want to come to
Absolutely.
the market with a clear understanding of what should and shouldn't be factored into our valuation and defining that ourselves, through the process of vetting those adjustments is really the only way to make sure that a buyer is going to present real market offers.
Yeah, absolutely. So something tells me from what you said that you've seen some missteps from sellers along the way. What can you share without naming names, of course? Just maybe share a few of those missteps.
Especially in our consulting arm, we have clients that maybe hadn't really considered a sale, but have gotten cold offers and had that be a little bit more top of mind. So what we've done in situations like that would be to kind of take a step, really evaluate the business's financial performance, and come back to the buyers with a clean package of here's the business's true performance and here are the other relevant KPIs within the business. And so we do that with the original buyer that had the cold offer, but we also expand the scope a little bit so our clients can understand what the range of offers and flexibility really looks like in the market. So in the past, when we've done this, we have transacted a deal with the original bidder, original DSO that reached out. But the difference is that the valuation is going to be based on the true performance and it's going to increase because, like we said, some of those things just aren't captured by the broad rules of thumb.
Yeah. So I've spent my life building this business. I've defined myself. I know what I want. Now I'm going to play devil's advocate. What's to keep me from just defining my EBITDA as two or three times what it might actually be?
I think it's really where the market experience comes in. Over the years of representing clients and really validating our clients' EBITDA every day, we've grown to understand how the market evaluates what's an acceptable add back to EBITDA and really what's needed to support those adjustments. To present an EBITDA that is wildly off or inflated really serves little more than just allowing the buyer to define the business's performance themselves because the inflated figures really can't be trusted. Finding that balance and working through each item is a big part of the onboarding process and a process before we even take a business to market.
Okay. So now that I've defined myself financially and that's been validated, we're all ready to go. There have to be other elements I need to be thinking about. What else should I have in mind, know what I want before I move forward in that sale process?
I think we define or really look at defining a business or a transaction in two ways. Right. So we want to zero in and define the business financially, but we also want to have an idea of goals for a transaction. I think this is something that can be difficult to incorporate when a seller might look at a transaction on sort of a one-off basis. When you do that, you're not really able to compare the options for the doctor post sale. You're not able to compare different levers or structures and how they align with your financial and lifestyle goals. And you're really not able to see the amount of flexibility within the market. So getting a general idea of what you're looking for out of the deal and marketing specifically to groups where those kinds of things are going to be feasible is really the other side of the coin when taking a business to market.
As we know, each DSO has their own expectations, their own culture, and those expectations come in an infinite number of packages depending on the group. But you talked a little bit about structured process. Can you tell our listeners what you mean by that?
Sure. The structured process really is just creating a level playing field for all of our buyers to kind of participate in. So that's going to be clear information that's consistent, communicated to the market, but also a clear expectation from the market of how they're going to participate in the process. So essentially, a timeline for them to follow to ensure that we're clear on when we're accepting offers, what we're looking for out of those offers, and really when we're planning to make a decision to move to the next step. That's something that we spend a lot of time building out while preparing to take a business to market. And again, the key there is that it allows our seller to evaluate everything kind of apples to apples. They get all of the initial offers, are able to work through the various structures and flexibility that's open to them, and really kind of define what makes the most sense for them rather than kind of forcing something to work.
Well, sure. And there are so many options out there, and making it work is definitely not where you want to land. I mean, no one builds a business just to make it work, right? We always want to end up ensuring that we have realistic expectations, of course, but we want to get our needs met and be where we get to enjoy our work. Or maybe you plan to exit, maybe you plan to stay on, or maybe that's a leadership role. But getting what you want and working towards that and setting yourself up properly makes all the sense in the world. So, knowing that going through that process, some of those options are going to change. Maybe things become more or less important. Can you help us with some common examples? Meaning, like, how have you seen that wish list, I'll call it, evolve?
Yeah, I think there are two pretty common scenarios. The first is the doctor who's sort of burnt out with the process of both being a doctor and owning a business. So we've seen doctors go through a process where at the onset they were fairly adamant that they were ready to retire. But in the process, after realizing how much administrative work could be removed from their plate, we're maybe a little bit more open to staying on for a couple of years and continuing to work clinically. That's fairly common. I think the other side is maybe a little bit more economic, where a seller may have had a certain cash goal as part of a transaction, but in meeting with a certain group, a DSO, particularly emerging DSOs, were so impressed by both the group and the culture, but also the economic opportunity that they were maybe more open to a larger rollover percentage. So those are two things that can kind of shift as you walk through the process, but being within that structured process, being able to see multiple offers and really what's out there allows you to kind of shift around a little bit and make sure that the deal that you ultimately choose is one that truly meets all of your goals and isn't something that's just kind of checking the majority of boxes or even less than that.
Those things shift around, I feel, as you see offers come in. And maybe just for some people, having that burden of taking care of the business side of things can be really appealing. Maybe you just want to get back to practicing clinical dentistry, and that's what lights your fire, right? Or maybe not. Maybe it's leadership. Maybe it's, I want to get the heck out of here in a couple of years or sooner. So those options are all available. And I think by taking the time to prepare and evaluate, you can kind of get there. So, I mean, we know that best fit's got to be a priority if you're going to be happy long term. So, on that note, I have one more question that kind of sums things up over what we've talked about and making sure we're ready to ride this M&A wave as it's coming in. Can you give us an example of what works well and maybe one where the situation wasn't ideal, but you and the team were able to square things up for them and get the seller into a desirable place where they were happy?
Sure. So we represented an orthodontic group a couple of years ago where the doctor had a huge runway for success, a lot of potential, a lot of expansion opportunity within his offices, but needed a little bit of resources to help bring that to fruition. Through our process, we were able to match him up with an emerging DSO specific to that specialty and really align them both operationally but also economically for long-term success. That doctor has become an incredible and integral part of that organization and has really seen those goals be realized as part of the partnership. I think when we talk about situations that maybe aren't ideal or are in sellers, found themselves in a sticky situation and are looking at a transaction as a way out, I do think we come back to the doctor that is burnt out, right? The doctor that maybe doesn't see a future for the business with themselves at the helm. That's a common reason for wanting to sell. And I think when we enter a situation like that, we're looking for a group that is going to be able to take those key issues off of the doctor's plate and get them back into the work that they're really best positioned for. So we've done a number of transactions where that's been the goal over the past couple of years. And it's one of the more rewarding parts of my role because I get to see that seller go from a position of discomfort or even pain to a partnership where they feel like they're really empowered to do their thing and focus on that as a way of keeping the practice, growing, taking care of those employees, moving it forward.
Yeah, and that could be frustrating when, you enter the process and you don't feel prepared, and that whole lack of awareness, whether you're looking to exit immediately or if you want to continue on to practice or play a different role in the business moving forward, that's a little intimidating. So the more you invest in your growth and knowledge, the better off you'll be. And obviously, you don't have to go it alone. We always want to ensure that you get that right financial modeling and you have people like Kyle to support you and making sure that you've got the right foundation, the right valuation to get yourself prepared for where you want to go. So, Kyle, as always, we appreciate the market updates you share with us.
Absolutely. Thanks again for having me.
Sure. And thanks for talking about the M&A wave here. We want to make sure everybody gets prepared for exit if they're looking to do that this year. The time is now. And we, of course, never want to leave money on the table. So thanks again for sharing your insights with our audience. I know more than a few of you will want to talk through options with Kyle after this episode airs. So if you'd like to connect with him about your next steps, or if you want to schedule some time to learn about any of Polaris expert advisory services, or maybe there's a topic we haven't covered that you want to hear about, just go ahead and send us an email to info@polarishealthcarepartners.com, or you can reach us by visiting our website at polarishealthcarepartners.com. Thanks so much for being a loyal listener and subscriber. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a rating on Apple Podcast, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you on the next episode of the Group Practice Accelerator Podcast.